The first shot rang out just as Grace Anderson stepped off the stagecoach into the dusty main street of Las Cruces, New Mexico Territory, in the summer of 1878. She flinched, clutching her valise tighter as she realized it wasn't gunfire but the blacksmith's hammer striking hot iron across the way. After 3 days of bone-rattling travel from Santa Fe, her nerves were as frayed as the edges of her once fine traveling dress. "First time in Las Cruces, madam." The stagecoach driver handed down her trunk, dust coating his weathered face. "Yes," she answered, surveying the town with apprehension. Las Cruces wasn't much a collection of adobe and wooden buildings stretching along the main street, the imposing courthouse standing as the only building of real significance. The distant Oregon mountains provided a dramatic backdrop to this frontier outpost, their jagged peaks reminding Grace just how far from Philadelphia she had come. "The schoolhouse is that way," the driver pointed, noticing the letter she clutched in her hand. "Though I heard the teaching position's been filled already." Grace's heart sank. "Filled, but the letter. I was guaranteed board changed their minds 2 weeks ago, hired the mayor's niece instead." He tipped his hat. "Sorry, madam. Good luck to you." Grace stood alone in the street, dust swirling around her skirts as the realization settled in. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles for nothing. With her parents gone and the family home sold to pay debts, she had exactly $12.48 to her name. Not enough for a return ticket, not nearly enough to survive. "You look lost." Grace turned to find a woman in a practical calico dress watching her with sympathy. "The teaching position is gone," Grace said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Martha's boarding house is just down the street," the woman offered. "Reasonable rates and she might know of work. I'm Sadie Miller, by the way. Grace Anderson." "Thank you." Martha's boarding house proved to be a tidy 2-story building with a wrap-around porch. The proprietress, a round-faced woman with steel-gray hair, looked Grace up and down critically. "Teachers don't last in Las Cruces," Martha said flatly after hearing Grace's situation. "Too wild, too dusty, too many cowboys thinking educated women are just what they need for a wife." "I have nowhere else to go," Grace admitted. "And I need work." Martha's expression softened. "I'll give you a week's board on credit. There's a mercantile looking for help, and Doc Harris mentioned needing someone with neat handwriting to organize his papers." Grace took a room on the second floor with a small window overlooking the street. She unpacked her meager belongings: 2 dresses, a nightgown, her mother's silver hairbrush, and a stack of beloved books. The room was sparsely furnished but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small writing desk. The next morning, Grace presented herself at Wilson's Mercantile. The owner, a thin man with spectacles, looked skeptical. "Can you do sums in your head?" "We get cowboys in here who can't read the prices." "I can," Grace assured him. "I was top of my class at the Philadelphia Women's Academy." "Philadelphia, eh? What brings you to this dusty corner of nowhere? A teaching position that no longer exists." Wilson nodded. "I'll give you a trial. 6 days a week, 8 to 6, $1 a day." It wasn't teaching, but it would keep her from starving. Grace spent that first day learning the inventory, everything from bolts of calico to ammunition, from patent medicines to hard candy. By closing time, her feet ached and her head spun with prices and stock locations. She was locking up when 3 riders thundered down the main street, whooping and hollering. One fired his pistol in the air, causing Grace to startle and drop her keys. "Elliott boys," Wilson muttered, retrieving the keys. "Wild bunch. Their daddy, Isaac Elliott, runs the biggest ranch outside town. Good man, but since his wife died, those boys have been running roughshod." "Are they dangerous?" Grace asked, watching the riders disappear toward the saloon. Not dangerous exactly, just young men with too much freedom. Wilson sighed. Elliott's got 5 kids altogether. Those 3 oldest boys think they own the territory, and there's 2 little ones at home that hardly know their daddy these days. Grace walked back to the boarding house, mulling over the day. Las Cruces was nothing like Philadelphia, rougher, more immediate somehow. There was no artifice here, no polite society rituals to hide behind. Everyone spoke plainly and judged quickly. The following days fell into a pattern. Grace worked at the Mercantile, gradually earning Wilson's grudging respect. In the evenings, she helped Doc Harris organize his patient records, earning extra money for her carefully neat handwriting. She ate her meals at the boarding house, listening to the local gossip but contributing little. She was nearly through her second week when the cowboy came to town. Grace was arranging a display of ribbon when the bell over the door jangled. She looked up to see a tall man filling the doorframe. His clothes were trail-worn, his face shadowed by several days' growth of beard, but there was something commanding about his presence. A boy of about 4 clung to his hand, wide-eyed and silent. "Mornin'," the man said, voice deep and graveled. "Need supplies?" "Of course, sir," Grace replied, straightening her apron. "What can I help you with? Flour, coffee, sugar?" "The usual." He glanced down at the boy. "And some peppermint sticks, I reckon." As Grace gathered the supplies, the man watched her with an intensity that made her self-conscious. He wasn't like the cowboys who occasionally flirted with her. There was a seriousness to him, a weight. "You're new," he observed as she tallied his purchases. "Yes, 2 weeks now. Isaac Elliott." He extended a calloused hand. "This here's my youngest, Joseph." Grace hesitated before shaking his hand. "Grace Anderson, I've heard of you, Mr. Elliott. Nothing good, I expect." A hint of a smile touched his eyes. "Just that you have a large ranch and several sons. 5 children altogether." His expression darkened. 3 boys who think they're men already, a daughter who's more stubborn than all her brothers combined, and little Joseph here. The boy stared up at Grace solemnly. She tried to smile at him, but children always made her nervous. Joseph didn't smile back. "That'll be $4.17, she said, turning back to the safer territory of commerce. Isaac paid, and as he gathered his purchases, he paused. "Miss Anderson, would you happen to know of anyone looking for work? I need help at the ranch." "What kind of help?" He hesitated. "The children. They need someone to cook, keep house, teach the little ones their letters." "A governess?" Grace asked, surprised. "I suppose that's what they call it back east." He looked uncomfortable with the term. "Just someone who can manage things." Since their mama died 3 years ago, it's been difficult. Grace thought of the 3 wild Elliott boys who tore through town weekly. "I can imagine. Pays good. Room and board included." He paused. "It's 10 miles out of town, though, isolated." "I'm sorry, Mr. Elliott, but I don't think I'd be suitable." Grace shook her head. "I'm not good with children." Joseph tugged at his father's sleeve, whispering something. Isaac looked down. "What's that, son?" "She's pretty," the boy whispered, just loud enough for Grace to hear. "Like in the picture of Mama." Grace felt her cheeks warm as Isaac's ears reddened above his beard. "We'll find someone, Joseph," he said gently. "Let's go see about those horses now." After they left, Grace found herself distracted for the rest of the day. The image of Isaac Elliott's weathered face and his son's solemn eyes kept returning to her. There was a sadness there, a need that pulled at her despite her reservations. That evening at dinner, Martha served beef stew while sharing the latest town gossip. "Isaac Elliott was in town today," one of the other boarders mentioned. "Looking for help again, I hear." "That man needs a wife, not a housekeeper," Martha said, passing the cornbread. "Those children are running wild." The oldest boy, Thomas, is 17 and already has a reputation with the saloon girls. The middle boys, Samuel and Matthew, are 14 and 13 and heading the same way. And poor little Abigail is 11 with no proper female guidance. What about the little one? Grace found herself asking. Joseph? Just turned 4 last month, sweet child but quiet, barely talks to anyone but his sister and father. Grace pushed her stew around her plate. Why doesn't Mr. Elliott remarry? The table fell silent until Sadie Miller spoke up. He loved his wife something fierce. Sarah was a gentle soul, came out from Boston to teach and caught Isaac's eye right away. When she died in childbirth with Joseph, something in Isaac died too. Those children need a mother, Martha declared, but Isaac won't court anyone. Just hires housekeepers who can't manage those wild boys and leave within a month. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking of her dwindling prospects in Las Cruces. The mercantile job barely covered her board and she had no real ties here. But 5 children. She'd always been awkward around children, unsure how to speak to them or what they needed. Her one attempt at teaching Sunday school back in Philadelphia had ended in tears, hers, not the children's. A week later, Isaac Elliott returned to the mercantile. This time he was alone, his face grim with determination. "Miss Anderson," he said without preamble, "I'd like to speak with you." Wilson nodded for her to step away from the counter. "Mr. Elliott," Grace asked, once they were in a quiet corner, "I'll be direct. I need help with my children and I'm willing to pay well for it. Double whatever Wilson's paying you plus room and board." Grace blinked in surprise. "I told you, sir, I'm not good with children. You can read and write, you're organized, you speak properly." He ran a hand through his dark hair, streaked with premature silver at the temples. "My oldest daughter found a dead rattlesnake in her bed yesterday, her brother's idea of a joke. I can't." His voice faltered. "I can't do this alone anymore." Grace felt a surge of sympathy despite herself. "I'm sorry about the snake, but 1 month," he interrupted. "Try it for 1 month. If it doesn't work, I'll pay your way back east if that's what you want." The offer was too practical to dismiss outright. Grace considered her situation, the tiny room, the long hours at the mercantile, the realization that she was simply existing rather than living. "I know nothing about ranching," she said finally. "I'm not asking you to rope cattle." A hint of humor touched his eyes. "Just to bring some order to the house and maybe teach Joseph his letters. Abigail too, she's falling behind. And the older boys," Isaac's expression hardened, "they'll mind their manners with you or they'll answer to me." Grace took a deep breath. 1 month then, as a trial. 2 days later, Grace found herself in a wagon beside Isaac Elliott, her trunk secured in the back, heading out of Las Cruces toward the mountains. The landscape was unlike anything she had known, vast, open, with a harsh beauty that both intimidated and captivated her. "It's beautiful," she said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. Isaac glanced at her, surprised. "Most Easterners just see emptiness." "It's not empty, it's honest." She gestured to the mountains ahead. "There's no pretense here. Everything is exactly what it appears to be." "Not everything," Isaac murmured, but didn't elaborate. The Elliott Ranch came into view as they crested a rise, a sprawling adobe and wood structure nestled against a backdrop of hills. Several outbuildings surrounded the main house, and a large corral held horses that raised their heads at their approach. It was larger and more prosperous-looking than Grace had expected. "Welcome to the Sundown Ranch," Isaac said, a note of pride in his voice. As they pulled up to the house, the front door burst open and Joseph came running out, followed more sedately by a girl Grace assumed was Abigail. The girl had long dark braids and her father's serious eyes, though her face was round with lingering childhood. She watched Grace warily as Joseph threw himself at his father. "Papa, did you bring candy? Is this the new lady? Will she stay?" Thomas said she wouldn't. Isaac lifted his son with ease. "This is Miss Anderson, and yes, she's going to help us for a while. Where are your brothers?" "Out back," Abigail answered. Thomas said they didn't need to meet another temporary woman. Isaac's jaw tightened. "We'll see about that." He turned to Grace. "Abigail, this is Miss Anderson. She'll be teaching you and Joseph and helping around the house." Abigail offered a cautious curtsy. "How do you do, madam?" "I'm pleased to meet you, Abigail," Grace replied, feeling increasingly out of her depth. "You have a lovely home." "It's not very tidy inside," the girl confessed. "The boys make a mess and I try, but—" "We'll work on it together," Grace assured her, wondering what she had gotten herself into. The interior of the house confirmed Abigail's warning. It wasn't dirty exactly, but it had the disheveled look of a place inhabited primarily by males with little time for domestic concerns. Boots were scattered by the door, a saddle lay across a chair, and dishes from breakfast still sat on the large oak table. "I'll show you to your room," Isaac said, looking embarrassed by the state of his home. "Then we'll round up the boys for introductions." Grace's room was at the end of a hallway, a simple space with a bed, dresser, and small desk beneath a window that overlooked the corral. It was clean, at least, with fresh linens and a vase of wildflowers that she suspected were Abigail's touch. "It's lovely," she said, and meant it. After the cramped boarding house, the space felt luxurious. "The bathroom's down the hall. We have running water, had it put in last year." Isaac said this with pride. "Sarah always wanted modern conveniences. The kitchen has a proper stove too, not just the fireplace." "Your wife sounds like she was a remarkable woman." A shadow crossed his face. "She was. The children miss her terribly. I do too." An awkward silence fell between them. "I should meet the rest of the children," Grace said finally. "Right." Isaac straightened. "I'll find them." The three older Elliott boys were lined up in the main room when Grace returned. They stood with the stiff posture of soldiers at inspection, eyes forward, jaws set. Thomas, the eldest, was almost as tall as his father, with the same dark hair but blue eyes that must have come from his mother. Samuel and Matthew were clearly brothers, with matching scowls and restless energy evident even in their forced stillness. "Boys," Isaac said, his voice carrying a warning. "This is Miss Anderson. She'll be living here, helping with the house and teaching Joseph and Abigail." "Yes, sir," they chorused without enthusiasm. "Thomas, Samuel, and Matthew," Isaac introduced, pointing to each in turn. "My oldest boys." Grace stepped forward. "I'm pleased to meet you all. I hope we'll get along well." Thomas's gaze was direct, challenging. "How long are you planning to stay, Miss Anderson?" "Thomas," Isaac warned. "It's a fair question," Grace replied. "1 month for certain. After that we'll see." "The last one lasted 2 weeks," Samuel muttered. "And the one before that 10 days, added Matthew. Grace raised an eyebrow. "Is that a challenge, gentlemen?" The boys exchanged surprised glances at her direct approach. "I don't scare easily," she continued, though her heart was pounding. "And I don't give up at the first sign of difficulty. If you decide to make my stay difficult, I'll simply have to be equally determined to succeed." Thomas looked at her with new interest. "Yes, madam." The first few days at Sundown Ranch were a blur of activity as Grace attempted to bring order to chaos. The house itself needed a thorough cleaning, the pantry required organization, and the laundry had piled up alarmingly. Though Isaac had mentioned teaching the younger children, Grace quickly realized that establishing a functional household came first. To her surprise, Abigail proved an eager helper, shadowing Grace and absorbing every domestic tip with serious attention. "Mama used to keep everything so nice." the girl confided as they folded clean sheets together. After she died, we had a succession of housekeepers, but none of them stayed long. Why is that, do you think? Grace asked carefully. Abigail looked uncomfortable. Thomas and the boys, they play tricks, nothing dangerous, she added quickly, but annoying things. Frogs in drawers, salt in the sugar bowl, snakes in bedding. I see. Grace thought of the rattlesnake incident Isaac had mentioned. And your father, Papa's busy with the ranch, and I think... Abigail hesitated. I think it hurts him to be in the house too much. It reminds him of Mama. Grace nodded, understanding more about the situation. Well, I'm not easily frightened by tricks, and I think this house could be a happy place again with some effort. Abigail's smile was the first genuine one Grace had seen from her. I'd like that. Joseph proved to be a shadow as well, following Grace around the house and peppering her with questions. Unlike his wary sister, he accepted Grace's presence immediately and with enthusiasm. Can you tell stories? He asked on the third day as Grace hung laundry on the line. What kind of stories? Any kind. Papa's too tired at night and Abigail only knows a few. Grace thought for a moment. I know stories about knights and dragons, about clever foxes and silly bears, about children who find magical lands. Joseph's eyes widened. Will you tell me one tonight? If you eat all your vegetables at dinner, Grace bargained, surprised at how naturally the negotiation came. The older boys kept their distance initially, watching Grace with suspicion but refraining from outright mischief. They came in from ranch work with their father at dusk, ate the meals Grace prepared, and disappeared to their rooms or back outside. Isaac himself was a constant presence at the periphery of Grace's awareness, coming and going, handling ranch business, speaking quietly with foremen, occasionally helping the older boys with chores. He took his meals with the family, but said little, though Grace often caught him watching her interactions with the children. On her 5th day at the ranch, Grace finally established enough order to begin lessons with Joseph and Abigail. She set up a corner of the dining room as a schoolroom, using books she had brought from Philadelphia and slates Isaac provided. Joseph proved to be bright and eager, quickly learning his letters and simple words. Abigail was more reluctant, her education having been neglected in the years since her mother's death. I'm not good at book learning, the girl confessed when she struggled with a simple math problem. Nonsense, Grace said firmly. You haven't had consistent teaching, that's all. Your mind is perfectly capable. Abigail looked unconvinced. Thomas says girls don't need much schooling anyway. Does he? Grace raised an eyebrow. And what does your father say? Papa says Mama was the smartest person he ever knew, and she read more books than anyone in the territory. There you have it, then. Grace tapped the slate. Let's try again. The breakthrough with Thomas came unexpectedly. Grace was struggling to move a heavy bookcase in the main room when he appeared in the doorway, watching her efforts with amusement. You'll hurt yourself that way, he said finally. Grace straightened, blowing a strand of hair from her face. I suppose you could do better. Yes, madam, I believe I could. He moved into the room. Where do you want it? Against that wall, please. I'm trying to organize the books by subject. Thomas moved the bookcase with ease, then lingered, examining the sorted stacks of books on the table. You read all these? He asked, picking up a volume of Shakespeare. Most of them. They were my father's. Thomas thumbed through the pages. We have to read this in school, but I never understand what they're talking about. Grace saw an opportunity. Shakespeare isn't meant to be read silently. It's meant to be performed, heard. The language makes more sense when you hear it spoken aloud. Thomas looked skeptical. Here, Grace said, taking the book. Listen to this. She read a passage from Henry V, putting all her passion into the St. Crispin's Day speech. When she finished, Thomas was watching her with new respect. That's about soldiers, he said. About brotherhood. Yes. Shakespeare wrote about everything: love, honor, betrayal, ambition, family. She handed the book back to him. Try reading it aloud sometime. You might be surprised. That evening at dinner, Thomas asked if he might borrow the Shakespeare volume. Isaac looked up in surprise. You want to read Shakespeare? Miss Anderson says it makes more sense spoken aloud, Thomas replied defensively. Isaac glanced at Grace with an unreadable expression. Of course you can borrow it. Later, after the children were in bed, Isaac found Grace on the front porch, enjoying the cool evening air and the spectacular view of stars undiminished by city lights. "May I join you?" he asked. Grace nodded, suddenly aware of her unchaperoned state. But this was the frontier, she reminded herself, not Philadelphia drawing rooms. Thomas hasn't shown interest in a book since his mother died, Isaac said, settling into a chair beside her. Whatever you said to him made an impression. I just suggested a different approach. Grace looked up at the stars. He's at a difficult age, not a child anymore, but not quite a man. He's testing boundaries. All three of those boys are testing every boundary I set, Isaac sighed. And I'm not doing a particularly good job of holding the line. You're raising 5 children alone while running a ranch, Grace said gently. That's an impossible task for anyone. Sarah made it look easy, he said softly. She had a way with them, firm but gentle. They adored her. They still do, Grace observed. Abigail tries to be like her. Joseph treasures every story about her. Even the boys, their rebellion is partly grief, I think. Isaac studied her. For someone who claims not to be good with children, you see them clearly. Grace looked down. I understand grief. My parents died within months of each other 2 years ago. It changes you. Yes, Isaac agreed. It does. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars. For the first time since arriving at Sundown Ranch, Grace felt a sense of peace settle over her. The first real test came the following week. Grace was teaching Joseph about farm animals when a commotion from the kitchen interrupted them. "Miss Anderson," Abigail called, panic in her voice. Grace hurried to find the kitchen filling with smoke, flames licking up the side of the stove where a dish towel had caught fire. Abigail stood frozen in terror. Without thinking, Grace grabbed the lid of a large pot and clamped it over the flames, smothering them. She threw open windows to clear the smoke, then turned to Abigail, who had begun to cry. "I'm sorry," the girl sobbed. "I was trying to make biscuits to surprise you. I didn't notice the towel was too close to the flame." Grace pulled her into a hug. "You're not hurt, that's what matters. The stove is fine, just a bit scorched. Papa will be angry." "No, he won't," Grace assured her, though she wasn't certain. "Accidents happen. Now, shall we try those biscuits together?" By the time Isaac and the boys returned for the midday meal, fresh biscuits sat on the table, and only a faint smell of smoke lingered. Abigail confessed the incident immediately, her face flushed with shame. To Grace's surprise, Isaac simply pulled his daughter into a hug. "Your mama set fire to the kitchen curtains once, trying a new recipe," he told her. "Nearly burned the whole room down, but she made the best apple pie in the territory, so I forgave her." Abigail's eyes widened. "Mama did that." "You never told me." "She made me promise not to." Isaac's eyes crinkled. "But I think she'd want you to know that everyone makes mistakes, especially when learning something new." Grace watched the exchange, seeing the gentle father beneath the stern rancher for the first time. That night, after the children were asleep, he sought her out again on the porch. "Thank you for how you handled the kitchen incident," he said. "Abigail told me you didn't scold her once." "She was scared enough without scolding," Grace replied, "and she was trying to do something nice." The last housekeeper would have packed her bags over less. Isaac leaned against the porch railing. You've been here nearly 2 weeks now. The house is running smoothly, Joseph is learning his letters, and even the older boys are behaving better." He paused. "Are you still planning to leave at the end of the month?" The question caught Grace off guard. She had been so busy establishing routines and connecting with the children that she'd given little thought to her departure date. I'm not sure," she admitted. "I did promise a month." "And if I asked you to consider staying longer?" Their eyes met in the dim light, and Grace felt something shift between them, a recognition, a possibility. "I would consider it," she said softly. The third week brought a thunderstorm that trapped everyone indoors. The older boys grew restless, prowling the house like caged animals. By afternoon, even Joseph's usual good humor had evaporated, and Abigail was snappish. "We need an activity," Grace declared. "Something that uses all this energy." She organized a treasure hunt, sending the children to find objects throughout the house based on riddles she quickly composed. To her surprise, even Thomas and his brothers joined in, their competitive natures engaged by the challenge. When Isaac returned from checking the livestock, soaked to the skin and weary, he found his children gathered around the dining table, arguing good-naturedly over who had solved the most riddles. "What's all this?" he asked, water dripping from his hat. "Miss Anderson made a game," Joseph informed him excitedly. "I found 3 things. 4, corrected Samuel. "I won with 7. "Because you cheated," Thomas accused, but without real heat. Isaac caught Grace's eye over the children's heads, a silent thank you in his gaze that warmed her more than the fire crackling in the hearth. That night, with rain still drumming on the roof, Grace found herself unable to sleep. She wrapped a shawl around her nightgown and tiptoed to the kitchen for a glass of water. To her surprise, Isaac was there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and account book spread before him. "You're up late," he said, rising when she entered. "The storm," she explained. "I've always found it difficult to sleep through thunder," he nodded. "Coffee? Just water, thank you." As she filled her glass, she felt his eyes on her and became acutely aware of her informal dress. In Philadelphia, being seen in nightclothes would have been scandalous. Here, alone in a kitchen at midnight with a man who was not her husband, was surely worse. Yet she felt no fear, only a nervous awareness of Isaac as a man rather than her employer. He had removed his usual vest and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing strong forearms browned by the sun. "You were good with them today," he said, breaking the silence. "I haven't heard them laugh like that in years." "They're wonderful children," Grace said, surprising herself with the sincerity of the statement. "Lively and intelligent, you should be proud." "I am," he hesitated. "Grace, Miss Anderson, Grace is fine," she said softly. "Grace." Her name in his deep voice sent a shiver through her. "I've been thinking about your position here." "Oh," she clutched her water glass tighter. "The month is nearly up. I'd like to offer you a permanent position. Higher wages, of course, and perhaps we could expand the schoolroom, get proper books for the children." Grace felt both pleased and oddly disappointed. "You're satisfied with my work, then?" "More than satisfied." Isaac stood, moving closer. "The house feels like a home again. The children are happier than I've seen them since Sarah died." He paused. "I'm happier." The air between them seemed to thicken. Grace was acutely aware of her pulse quickening. "I should consider your offer carefully," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course. There's no rush." But he didn't move away. A loud crack of thunder made Grace jump, splashing water on her shawl. Isaac steadied her with a hand on her arm, and for a moment they stood close, too close for propriety. His eyes dropped to her lips, and Grace felt herself swaying toward him. The sound of footsteps in the hallway broke the spell. They stepped apart just as Joseph appeared, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Papa, I'm scared of the thunder." Isaac immediately knelt to his son's level. "Nothing to be afraid of, Joseph, just the sky clearing its throat. Can I sleep with you?" The boy asked. Isaac glanced up at Grace apologetically. "Of course you can. Say good night to Miss Anderson." "Good night, Miss Grace," Joseph murmured. "Good night, Joseph. Sleep well." Grace smiled at the boy, then at Isaac. "Good night, Mr. Elliott." "Isaac," he corrected gently. After midnight conversations, "I think we can use first names." Grace nodded, feeling a blush warm her cheeks. "Good night, Isaac." The next day, an awkwardness lingered between them, an awareness neither acknowledged. Grace threw herself into her duties, keeping busy with lessons for the younger children and helping Abigail learn to make bread. Isaac rode out early with Thomas and Samuel to check fences damaged in the storm and didn't return until dinner. The meal was quieter than usual, everyone tired from the day's activities. Afterward, Matthew surprised everyone by offering to help Grace with the dishes. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said when they were alone in the kitchen. "Yes," Grace prompted when he fell silent. "Thomas is reading that Shakespeare book, and Samuel's always been good with numbers, and Abigail and Joseph have you teaching them now." He scrubbed a plate with unnecessary force. "But I'm not good at book learning, and I'm too old for basic lessons." Grace waited, sensing there was more. "But I like to draw," Matthew continued in a rush. "Mama used to say I had talent. I was wondering if you know anything about art." Grace's heart melted at the boy's vulnerability. "I studied drawing in school. I'm not an expert, but I know the basics. Would you like me to show you?" Matthew's face lit up. "You wouldn't mind?" "I'd be delighted. We could start tomorrow afternoon if you have time after your chores." When Isaac came in later to check that all was secure for the night, he found Grace and Matthew at the dining table, heads bent together over a sheet of paper. "Look, Pa," Matthew said eagerly. "Miss Grace is teaching me about perspective. See how these lines make it look like the barn is further away." Isaac examined the drawing with genuine interest. "That's impressive, son. Miss Grace says if I practice every day, I could get good enough to maybe sell drawings someday, like those artists who make pictures of the West for Eastern magazines." Isaac met Grace's eyes over his son's head. "Miss Grace is wise," he said softly. "You should listen to her." That night on the porch, their conversation was easier, the awkwardness of the previous night fading into a comfortable companionship. Grace told Isaac about her discovery of Matthew's artistic talent. "Sarah used to draw with him," Isaac remembered. "I'd forgotten that. She kept all his childhood sketches in a box somewhere." "He has real ability," Grace said. "With proper instruction, he could develop it into a valuable skill." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "You see things in my children that I've been too busy or blind to notice." He turned to her. "You were wrong, you know." "About what?" "When you said you weren't good with children." He smiled. "You understand them better than most." Grace considered this. "Perhaps I just needed the right children to practice on." Their eyes met, and the moment from the kitchen returned that sense of possibility, of something unspoken passing between them. "Grace," Isaac began, his voice low. "I've been thinking." The sound of a horse approaching at speed interrupted him. They both stood as a rider pulled up to the house, dismounting quickly. "Isaac," the man called, "there's trouble. Jenkins' boys caught 3 rustlers on the North Ridge. They're holding them at gunpoint, but they need help." Isaac was already moving. "I'll saddle up. Get Thomas and Samuel." Grace watched from the porch as Isaac and his oldest sons rode out into the night with the messenger, her heart in her throat. She hadn't considered the dangers of ranch life before, the isolation that meant men had to enforce justice themselves, the constant threat of those who would steal livestock or worse. She herded the younger children back to bed, assuring them their father would return soon, though she had no way of knowing if that was true. The house felt eerily quiet as she waited, unable to sleep. Sometime past midnight, Abigail padded into the main room where Grace sat with mending to keep her hands busy. "This happens sometimes," the girl said, curling up in a chair. "Papa has to go deal with ranch problems at night. Is it usually dangerous?" Grace asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Abigail shrugged. "Sometimes. Once he came home with a bullet graze on his arm, but Papa says that's part of ranching in the territory." Grace nodded, her worry only increasing. "Would you like some tea while we wait?" It was nearly dawn when they heard horses approaching. Grace and Abigail, who had finally dozed off in her chair, rushed to the porch. Isaac, Thomas, and Samuel dismounted slowly, exhaustion evident in their movements. "Everything's fine," Isaac assured them, catching Grace's concerned expression. "The rustlers are in the Las Cruces jail and no one was hurt." "Thank goodness," Grace breathed. "We've been worried sick." Isaac's expression softened. "I'm sorry, I should have sent word." "I'll make breakfast," Grace said, suddenly aware that she was still in her nightclothes with only a shawl for modesty. "You all must be starving." While the men washed up, Grace and Abigail prepared a hearty breakfast. By the time everyone was seated, the sun was fully up, casting golden light through the windows. "School is canceled for today," Grace announced. "I think we all need rest after the excitement." "Does that mean I can go back to bed?" Thomas asked hopefully. "After you eat," Isaac agreed. "You did well tonight, son." "You too, Samuel." The boys straightened at their father's praise, and Grace saw in that moment how much they craved his approval. As the household settled into the altered rhythm of the day, Grace found herself watching Isaac with new eyes. He was not just a rancher, a father, an employer. He was a man defending his livelihood, protecting his family and community. The danger he had faced made the comfort of home all the more precious. That evening, when Isaac sought her out on the porch for what had become their customary conversation, Grace found herself speaking before she could reconsider. "I've decided to accept your offer to stay," she said. "If it still stands." Isaac's expression brightened. "It stands." "But I have conditions," she continued. "Proper books for all the children, including art supplies for Matthew. Regular lessons, not just when ranch work allows. And—" she hesitated. "And," he prompted, "and I'd like your permission to bring some life back into this house. New curtains, perhaps flowers from the garden Sarah planted. It shouldn't feel like a memorial to what's lost, but a home for those still living." Isaac was quiet for so long that Grace feared she had overstepped. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You're right. Sarah would hate what I've allowed this place to become." He looked out at the darkening landscape. "She loved color and light and laughter, all the things that have been missing." "The children remember," Grace said gently. "They speak of her often." "And I don't," Isaac acknowledged. "It hurts too much." "Perhaps that could change too," Grace suggested. "They need to hear your memories of her, to know that it's all right to keep her in their hearts without being crushed by grief." Isaac turned to her, his eyes suspiciously bright in the twilight. "How did you become so wise, Grace Anderson?" "Not wisdom, just experience with loss," she smiled sadly. "And hope for healing." A month after Grace had arrived at Sundown Ranch, the house was transformed. New curtains brightened the windows, wildflowers appeared in vases, and the musty smell of neglect had been replaced by the aromas of fresh baking and lemon polish. The schoolroom corner had expanded to include a proper desk for each child, with shelves of books Isaac had ordered from Santa Fe. But the most profound changes were in the family itself. Joseph chattered constantly now, his vocabulary expanding daily. Abigail had begun to take pride in her domestic skills, even as she excelled in her studies. Matthew spent hours with his drawing materials, producing increasingly sophisticated sketches of ranch life. Samuel discovered an aptitude for mathematics that Grace encouraged with practical applications to ranch management. And Thomas, on the cusp of manhood, had begun riding out with his father not just as a worker, but as a partner learning the business. The wildness that had characterized the older boys had mellowed into purposeful energy. Grace found herself thinking less and less about Philadelphia, about her original plan to teach in town. The rhythm of ranch life suited her: the early mornings, the satisfaction of productive work, the close-knit family meals, and especially the evening conversations with Isaac that had become the highlight of her days. She was in the kitchen making preserves from late summer peaches when Thomas found her, his expression serious. "Miss Grace, can I talk to you about something?" "Of course." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Is everything all right?" "It's about Pa." Thomas hesitated. "His birthday is next week." "We haven't celebrated since Mama died. He won't allow it. But I was thinking, things are different now." Grace's heart warmed at the boy's thoughtfulness. "What did you have in mind?" "A surprise. Maybe a special dinner." And Abigail mentioned Mama used to make a chocolate cake he loved. "That sounds wonderful, Thomas. I'm sure your father would be touched." "There's something else." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "Pa smiles more now, laughs sometimes. It's because of you." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "I think it's because all of you are doing so well." Thomas shook his head. "It's you. The way he looks at you when you're not watching." He met her eyes directly. "Mama would have liked you." The simple statement brought tears to Grace's eyes. "That's the kindest thing you could say to me, Thomas. Thank you." The birthday celebration was planned in secret, with each child contributing something special. Abigail and Grace baked the chocolate cake. Matthew drew a portrait of the entire family, including Grace. Joseph picked wildflowers for the table. Samuel polished Isaac's favorite saddle to a high shine. And Thomas convinced the ranch hands to handle evening chores so Isaac could enjoy a night off. When Isaac entered the house that evening to find his family waiting, the table set with their best dishes, candles lit, and a cake in the center, he stopped in his tracks. "What's all this?" "Happy birthday, Papa," Joseph cried, running to hug his father's legs. "We wanted to surprise you," Abigail explained, watching his reaction anxiously. Grace stood back, letting the children have this moment with their father. Isaac's expression shifted from surprise to deep emotion as each child presented their gift. When Matthew gave him the portrait, Isaac studied it for a long moment. "You've included Miss Grace," he observed. "She's part of the family now," Matthew said simply. Isaac's eyes sought Grace across the room, and the look that passed between them made her breath catch. The evening was filled with laughter and stories, many about Sarah that Isaac shared without the usual shadow of grief. He spoke of their courtship, of her attempts at ranching that often ended in disaster, but never dampened her enthusiasm. She once tried to herd cattle wearing a silk dress she'd ordered from San Francisco, he recalled, chuckling. Said if the cowboys could look presentable, so could she. That dress never recovered. After the younger children were in bed, Thomas and Samuel excused themselves, leaving Grace and Isaac alone at the table. The candles had burned low, casting a warm glow over the remains of the celebration. "Thank you for this," Isaac said quietly. "I know it was your doing, at least in part." "It was Thomas's idea," Grace corrected. "I just helped with the cake. You've helped with far more than cake." Isaac reached across the table to take her hand. "Grace, there's something I need to say to you." Her heart began to race. "Yes. When Sarah died, I thought the best part of my life was over. I focused on the ranch, on basic survival. The children were fed and clothed, but this wasn't a home anymore." His thumb traced patterns on the back of her hand. "Then you arrived with your Philadelphia manners and your determination, claiming you weren't good with children." Grace smiled at the memory. "I truly believed that. You brought life back to this house, to the children, to me." Isaac's eyes held hers. "I never expected to feel this way again." "Isaac, please let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I know you came here as a teacher, a housekeeper, but you've become so much more. The children adore you, and I—" He paused, his voice dropping lower. "I find myself thinking of you in ways that have nothing to do with your skill with arithmetic or bread making." Grace felt a flush spread from her chest to her face. "I've had similar thoughts," she admitted. Isaac stood, drawing her up with him and moving around the table until they were standing close, her hand still in his. "I'm not asking you to replace Sarah. No one could, but there's room in this family for a new kind of love. Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Grace whispered, hardly daring to hope. "Grace Anderson," Isaac said solemnly, "would you consider becoming my wife, a mother to my children, a partner in this life we've begun to build together?" The answer was simple, clear as the stars that stretched across the New Mexico sky. "Yes," she said. "With all my heart, yes." Isaac's arms went around her, drawing her close as his lips found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. When they finally parted, Grace rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I should warn you," she murmured. "I'm still learning about children. I may make mistakes." Isaac laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "5 children in, I'm still making mistakes daily. We'll learn together." From the hallway came a muffled sound of celebration. Grace and Isaac turned to find all 5 Elliott children watching from around the corner, Joseph perched on Thomas's shoulders for a better view. "Were you spying?" Isaac asked, trying and failing to look stern. "We were just checking on the cake," Thomas said innocently. "Is Miss Grace going to be our mother now?" Joseph asked hopefully. Grace looked at Isaac, who nodded for her to answer. "If you'll have me," she said. Joseph wriggled down from his brother's shoulders and ran to wrap his arms around Grace's waist. One by one, the other children joined the embrace, even Thomas, who was trying to look too grown up to care but couldn't hide his smile. In that moment, surrounded by the Elliott family, her family now, Grace remembered her words to Isaac on her first journey to the ranch. The western landscape was honest, revealing itself exactly as it was. And now she understood that the same could be true of love. Not the carefully managed courtships of Philadelphia, but something open and genuine, born of shared purpose and genuine affection. "I'm no good with children," she had worried. Looking at the 5 faces smiling up at her, Grace knew she had never been more wonderfully wrong. 6 months later, Grace Elliott stood on the porch of Sundown Ranch, watching a spring sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. The house behind her hummed with the evening routine, Abigail setting the table, Matthew sketching by the window, Samuel calculating cattle weights, Thomas discussing ranch business with his father, and Joseph proudly reading aloud from his primer. Her hand rested on the slight swell of her abdomen, where the newest Elliott was just beginning to make its presence known. Isaac had been overjoyed at the news, the children excited about a new brother or sister. "Penny for your thoughts," Isaac said, stepping out to join her. "I was thinking about that stagecoach ride into Las Cruces," Grace replied, leaning against him as his arm circled her waist. "How terrified I was about the teaching position that no longer existed, how I thought my life was over before it had properly begun. And now I know it was just beginning." She turned in his arms to face him. "I came west looking for a job and found a family instead." "Are you happy, Mrs. Elliott?" Isaac asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Deliriously so, Mr. Elliott." She stretched up to kiss him as the last rays of sun gilded the world around them. "It turns out I'm quite good with children after all." Behind them, the sound of childish laughter floated through the open door, the soundtrack of their life together, the proof of how wonderfully wrong Grace had been.